Office for Exceptional Children. He serves on the data team, and I'm a member of the diverse learners team. So Matt and we've had lots of chances to work together, but I don't know that we've actually presented together before. So we'll see how it goes. And I know we have a couple of other people in the room who are knowledgeable about alternate assessment. So anybody feel free to chime in if there's something we're missing or something's unclear. We are going to stop at a couple of points to answer questions. So if you type your questions into the chat box, Andrea will keep an eye on that, and we'll take a minute between kind of each section to stop and answer questions. And I said the meetings be recorded, right? Okay. All right, Matt, passing it over to you.
All right, thank you, Virginia. So next
And I
slide.
have to advance the slides.
Yes. Thank you. So welcome everybody. Hope you're having a good day of learning, and hope you're not burned out yet because we have some more exciting stuff for you. So let's jump right into it and talk about what the special education profiles are and what data that they contain. So the special education profiles, they are a web-based report. It's created annually for each district and community school every year. So these reports, they display performance over time on results and compliance indicators that measure services and outcomes for students with disabilities. So the profiles, they are a monitoring tool that notify districts of any required activities and actions they have for the compliance and the survey indicators. So that's something that we're going to go into a lot of depth in this presentation. Next, please. So first off, it's good to know how to access the profiles. So we're going to take a look at that real quick. So the districts can access special education profiles and ratings together on the OHID homepage menu. So you just have to log into the OHID portal and select the profiles and ratings application, just like it's shown on this slide. Next, please. So as you can see, once you log in, you can see both the ratings and the profiles. These kind of function as, they serve a different function throughout the year. So we're going to talk about some key differences in a little bit, but our focus today is going to be on the profile. So just one other note about access is that I know the RDL network has a lot of SST people in it and a lot of ESC people in it. So SSTs should already have access to profiles for all their districts because of their OED's role. But any ESCs that are not technically part of the district, they're going to have to work with their district to get access. But that is something we have brought up to leadership, and we're kind of we want to improve the access and the availability of the profiles for the RDL network. So stay tuned. All right, next, please. So when we are looking at accessing the profiles, you can see the menu. It has a choice of multiple years of profiles containing multiple years of data. So this really is allowing districts to identify trends over time and to look at areas of progress and also to see any indicators that are not headed in the right direction. So we have a lot of data in here, and we hope that it's helpful to kind of look at as a trend. So not even just in isolation, but as a trend. So also on here, you can see the publication date of the profiles and the data year listed, just so that that's clear. The primary data year. There's a few indicators that used a different have lag data, so they use a different data year, but those are noted in the profile. And just one other thing that I wanted to make everybody aware of in terms of profile release. As many of you probably know, the 1920 special education profile, the one that was using the 1819 data, has been delayed earlier this year because of the ordered school building closure. So we just want to let everyone know we're working on getting things back on track, and we will definitely share out when we know more about the release timeline for that 1920 profile. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we said, the focus today is on the profiles, but I wanted to share a little bit about the ratings too, because I'm sure a lot of you are also familiar with those, and it's a common question as to what's the difference between the two and how they work together to kind of inform districts. So one thing to note is that the special education profiles are the beginning of a monitoring cycle. So they're sent in January or December, and they provide that initial data for the district. The special ed ratings, in contrast, they come at the end of the monitoring data cycle. So they're sent in the following August or September, and they're based on some of the data that's found in the profile. Another thing to notice as far as differences go is that the special education profiles, they display the district's longitudinal data for 5 years in both table and graph format. So again, we want to really we really want it to lend itself to analysis over time and looking for trends. But the ratings, they only display data for one school year, just that most recent year. One other thing is that while the profiles include, oh, can we go back, Virginia? One more. Thank you. So while the
Sorry.
profiles, it's okay. While the profiles include all the IDEA results and compliance indicators, so the ratings just include a subset of those indicators as well as a couple other things such as audit scores. So the profiles are the place to go for the full picture of IDEA indicators. So finally, the special ed profiles, they are that monitoring tool that we mentioned before. They are notifying districts of any required actions that they have for that year, either based on noncompliance, data investigation, or participation in a survey. So the ratings are, they give the districts a final score at the end of the year based on their data as well as the completion of those required actions. So the profiles are really what you're going to look at to kind of step through any required actions. All right, next slide. So what data is actually included in the profile? So it contains results and compliance indicators that are grouped by these essential questions about outcomes for children with disabilities. So we think that these groupings are a way to look at indicators in a way that encourages correction of systemic issues and thinking about things in a systemic way. So these four essential questions, they kind of are supposed to tie in directly to the purpose of IDEA, improving the performance of children with disabilities. So just taking a look at all these different indicators and what data is actually in the profile, we see that in the first essential question, this is dealing with young children being ready to enter kindergarten, ready to learn, and that looks at preschool education environments, preschool outcomes, and early childhood transition. The next essential question looks at children with disabilities achievement, and that looks at statewide assessment, suspension, expulsion, disparities, and school age educational environments. The third essential question looks at post-school outcomes, and so that looks at graduation, dropout rates, secondary transition compliance, and post-secondary outcomes. And the final essential question looks at implementation of IDEA services and looks at child find, facilitated parental involvement, and timely correction of non-compliant findings. Next slide, please. So the 1920 profile that, as we mentioned earlier, has been delayed and not yet released, we have a new essential question that is kind of encompasses all the required disproportionality regulations that are focused on equitable services and supports for children. So like the other compliance indicators, this will have required actions if it is not met that will be detailed in the profile. So we keep mentioning the profile has results and compliance indicators. Just to give a little more context, we're going to take a look at the difference between those two. So compliance indicators, they're usually based on targets of 0% or 100%, and they're often timeline based. The results indicators, in contrast, they're based on performance on measures such as state testing, and they have targets usually set with SAPEC, our parent and our parent group. So another thing is that the compliance indicators with a finding, they do have a required action, while the results indicators, if they don't make their targets, they don't have a required action. Finally, the compliance indicators, they do require an individual correction, a self-review summary report, an improvement plan, and systemic correction to be completed within a year of a finding being issued. So this is our focus for today. We're going to kind of walk through this process for compliance indicators. Next, please. So we just wanted to list here all the different indicators that might have a required action by districts. As you can see, it includes 3B and 3C, the alternate assessment. So that's going to be, our primary focus for today. But there's also discipline discrepancies, initial evaluations, early childhood transitions, and so on. So again, there are some differences in between all these different required action paths for all these different indicators, but in general, it's the same. So just becoming familiar with it and understanding the overall process should help you with any of those indicators listed here. One other thing to notice is indicator 8 and 14 are also they're also kind of compliance indicators, and they just require districts to participate in surveys. So they are kind of different, but they're detailed in the profile and they're pretty self-explanatory. All right, so here is the time we have to take a look at our chat box and see if we have any questions going on. So I think I'm just seeing questions about the slides maybe not displaying correctly, but hopefully that's all fixed up now. Any other questions?
Matt, you're getting awfully good at presenting the overview of the profiles.
Why,
No
thank you,
questions.
Virginia. Awesome. All right, then. Well, I guess I will turn it over to you, Virginia.
All right, we'll keep going. So Matt mentioned that we picked one indicator to focus in on today as an example of how the profiles work and how the action steps after the profiles are released lead school districts through a data analysis process. So this first, the indicator 3 is part of the essential question: are children with disabilities achieving at high levels? With indicator 3, we're really looking at a goal of ensuring that the right students are receiving the right services, taking the right assessments, and that they're learning in the right environments. This is, while it's not an equity question, it's very closely, in my mind, it's very closely related and really is an issue of equity as to whether or not students are receiving the level of rigor of instruction and assessment that they should be receiving. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background data on alternate assessment at the state level, and then we'll look at an example at the district level. So this pie chart shows you all students tested in Ohio. The blue are our students without disabilities that are taking the Ohio State tests. In red, 13% of our students are students with disabilities who also take the general assessment. They are not taking the alternate assessment. That 1.8% are our students who are taking the alternate assessment. The problem with that is that the federal government expects that 1.8 to be a lot closer to 1.0. The goal is to have 1% or less or fewer students participating in the alternate assessment. So we are significantly over that target as compared to other states. We are one of the worst offenders. So the goal of having alternate assessment as part of the profiles is to provide some monitoring and some support to districts. The overall goal based on ESSA is to reduce participation to 1%. To do that, we identified districts for different tiers of support. Tier 3 districts are not based solely on numbers. This isn't just a numbers game. We're looking at practices and policies as well. So in order to be in tier 3 and get that level of support, we're looking at districts' participation rates, but we're also looking at significant changes in their participation rates, generally increases, but we've seen a couple of odd decreases that are troubling. There's a justification form that districts complete each year if they expect to go over that 1%. And the data in the justification form is very interesting. There's some qualitative data in there that gives us an idea of the policies and procedures that are taking place in the district. Failure to submit a justification form would be a contributor to being in tier 3, and so is failure to submit accurate data. If a district is in tier 3, and you'll be hopefully assisting some of our tier 3 districts, the process is for them to complete a root cause analysis, to complete an improvement plan, and then report on those improvement efforts. And those are the steps we're going to go through in a little more detail. So here's Ohio's participation numbers in alternate assessment over 3 years. These are statewide numbers, and if you think about our goal being 1% or fewer, we're over that amount in all 3 of our alternate assessment test areas that the federal government requires. So 1.7, 1.78, and then science is a little higher at 1.93. So we've made some improvement, but not the 0.1% level of improvement that the Federal Department of Education expects. Again, we're one of the top 3 offenders in the country, which is not where we want to be. But we have a way to go, but including alternate assessment participation in special education profiles, we hope is going to draw more attention to the issue, and there'll be data to look at so districts will know where they stand. So here's what you'll see at the district level in the special education profile for essential question 2. And this box is the information for this district on participation in reading and math alternate assessments. At this point, we just have reading and math shown. The next iteration of the profiles will include science. But you can see on the right that this district did not meet the expectation in either reading or math. And we'll click that little orange for more information button, and it'll bring up a graph. So like Matt mentioned, there's data available in graphical table format, and also there are some bar graphs. There's some different ways of looking at data depending on what indicator you're in. This table shows us 5 years of data. Because the alternate assessment has not been part of the profile for all 5 years, you see the NR or the TBD, the to be determined and not reported. But for 16, 17, 18, this district was above 1%, significantly above 1%. So I'm just going to zoom into the reading results. So they are at 3.98%. That's almost 4%. And that's a difference of almost 3% from the target of 1. So this district would be flagged for us right away based on their participation rates. And then we'd look at their justification, see if there was a reason for this high rate of participation, perhaps a specialized program in the district, or our community schools that focus in on students with severe disabilities. Their participation numbers are often higher, but there's just a couple of those incidences. So as you scroll down, if we were looking at the profile, you would scroll down the page and you would see this next section on required actions. Everybody still with me? I didn't put a stop there for questions. I don't see any questions in the chat though. All right, I'm going to keep going. So when you scroll down, you'll see that this is indicator 3B, which has to do with the alternate assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And on the right-hand column, there's the 3 required actions that districts are expected to complete. And the first required action is to do a self-review summary report. The self-review summary report is different for each indicator because the questions are specific to that indicator. So this is just a zoom in on what that box in the circle looks like. It includes a hot link to a dynamic form that districts need to complete. They're expected to complete it with the help of their SST. So a school improvement team member, hopefully some input from special education at the district level. And this would be, I would hope, something that would be done as a team and not just the special education director. So when you click that hot link, it takes you to a self-review summary report page that looks something like this. We've kind of broken it up to fit on multiple slides, but this is what the section looks like. The questions here, again, are really specific to the alternate assessment. And it's organized into sections. So this first section with questions is about policies, procedures, and practices. And the thing I want you to see here is just that these questions are very qualitative. They're not quantitative. We're not looking at statistical data. We're looking at qualitative data about what it is that districts are doing on a daily basis. What are their policies, procedures, and practices? So for instance, question C, how do IEP teams confirm that students identified for the alternate assessment have a disability that significantly impacts intellectual functioning? What kind of records are they keeping, and what kind of procedure does the district expect their IEP teams to go through to make this assessment that the student qualifies for an alternate? The next section in the self-review is, that I zoomed in on that, policies, procedures, and practices. Here's the staff training. And I got to zoom in on that too. Okay. We were concerned that the text was small and that folks wouldn't be able to see it. So this section focuses on adult behaviors. We are used to looking at student data, and in a root cause analysis for something like the alternate assessment, we want to include adult behaviors as well. A lot of the causes of our concerns and issues in school improvement really go back to what is it that the adults are doing. So these questions ask for details of staff training. They're both quantitative and qualitative. And who receives the training is a really important one. Are we limiting training to just intervention specialists, or are we training general education teachers on what the participation criteria are? Who provides that training? Is it provided by somebody who's knowledgeable enough, who's gone to refresher trainings? So those, again, qualitative, but they're really important. All right, keeping moving. The next section, as you would be scrolling down in this dynamic form, each of these gray boxes expands as you type in it, because obviously your answer is not going to fit in that little box, because hopefully the districts are responding with more information than fits in that little box. So for family involvement, we start looking at how the district ensures that parents are part of the IEP team decision for alternate assessment eligibility. Parent involvement is really important here, and helping parents understand the long-term consequences of students participating in the alternate assessment is really an essential step in the process. How does the district keep a record of parent consent? Documenting these conversations and having records helps us to know that they all took place. Again, this is an analysis of adult behaviors. So the profile provided us with student participation rates, but when we start to do the root cause analysis, we need to start looking at what the adults are doing. The next section does bring us back to student data. We're going to zoom in. The first question is about students scoring at high levels at a consistent rate on the alternate assessment. So if students are consistently scoring above proficient, is it possible that they are on the wrong assessment? Would they be better served by being on the general assessment? Are there patterns across schools or grade levels? Are certain IEP teams sending students down one track instead of the other? And what are the patterns that you're seeing? The next two questions get into disability categories. And I think this is a spot where we can make a lot of progress. These categories are disability categories that do not often and almost never have an intellectual disability associated with them. Orthopedic impairment does not have anything to do with students' cognitive ability. So when districts get to this point, they want to be looking at how many students from these categories are participating and why are they participating. A student might be incorrectly identified as having an emotional disturbance when they more accurately have an intellectual disability. Or you might have students with emotional disturbances participating in the alternate assessment when they shouldn't be. We see students in all of these categories participating in the alternate assessment. So either students are being assigned to the wrong assessment or they're being incorrectly identified. So any student data in this section is something that you would want districts to look at and to see if there are patterns. The last piece of the student data review is looking for trends and patterns, commonalities across the district. There are some district-specific contexts that might occur for question F that would explain why one school building would have a higher participation rate than another. Perhaps there's a specialized program that's offered in one high school in the district and not at the other high schools. The goal is to make sure that students are taking the right tests and that they're receiving the right services. There are going to be instances where participation data at a higher rate makes sense and is justified. But in general, what we're seeing is that students are not being assigned to the proper assessment. And based on the fact that we're at 1.8% when we should be at 1%, that's a couple of thousand students that are not being served equitably and are not receiving the rigor that they should be receiving. So there's a couple of slides here that are not directly about data that I just want to make you kind of familiar with. I'm not going to talk about each point, but if you have questions about them, let me know. And I believe your handout has the speaker notes for these slides that might provide more detail. But the thing that we want to emphasize is that to get to 1% of our students participating, we really need to be assigning just our most significantly cognitively disabled students. To be significant, you want to look at the second bullet, that the student has both intellectual functioning issues and adaptive behavior deficits. That this is not just about their cognitive functioning, it's about their adaptive behavior as well. Individualized instruction. On this slide, notice the second bullet point as well. Teachers are probably using adapted tools. A lot of scaffolding, prompts and cues are required for students to practice, learn and demonstrate new skills. These are students who are not going to necessarily carry a skill from one classroom to the next. You're going to feel like they are not performing consistently over time. They would be using the extended standards, and the learning progressions would be a significant part of their curriculum. So if you have a student who is not using their learning goals are not tied to the extended standards, that's a student that I would question their appropriateness of their participating in the alternate. And then I've got just two more to make sure that you're aware of. These are the IDEA disability categories from the federal government. We include other health impairment, major and minor. That's one difference. But the disabilities we've put in red text are the ones that you are more likely to see students qualifying for the alternate assessment, but that doesn't mean that they definitely qualify. So while these might be most consistent with significant cognitive disabilities, they're not always significant cognitive disabilities. And I point to autism here as an example, and I think it's a good example to use with teachers because we talk about autism, the autism spectrum. Students with autism perform along a spectrum of skills. We know that some students with autism do have significant intellectual or cognitive delays, but there are other students who have slight intellectual or cognitive disabilities, or maybe not even a cognitive disability at the high end of the spectrum. So if you see a classroom of autistic students that are all assigned to the alternate assessment, something's not going right there. And traumatic brain injury is similar, that there's a continuum. So with all of these, they're most consistent, but they're not always going to be significant. And I have one more piece of the summary review about student equity. So here we're looking at subgroup data, and this is going to be more statistical and more quantitative than qualitative. And again, you want to be looking for, help districts look for trends. The last question is about adult behavior. Who's being trained in culturally responsive curriculum? Are there evidence-based practices for our English learners? And then these two slides I'm going to go past, but you might want to revisit them, and they're good to revisit with IEP teams. We don't want participation to be decided based on solely any of these items. Here's the rest of the list, and this is on the justification form and is on most of our guidance documents, so it should be familiar, and it should be familiar to teachers. And I probably used too much of my time, Matt. I apologize, but all right, we're at the questions point.
All right, well, I haven't seen any questions come in, Virginia, so maybe for the sake of time, let's just keep on rolling.
Keep rolling?
I think so. All right, so now that we have completed the self-review summary report and Virginia has done a nice job of giving us the overview of that, let's take a look at the next required action. So that is the improvement plan. Next slide, please. So we've got it when we open the improvement plan, we just click here, and as noted on the page, this is also supposed to be done with SST support, and this is based on those root causes that we found in that self-review summary report we just completed. So this improvement plan it's just an overview of what the plan looks like. Once you click on that link, this dynamic form comes up. And it's also one thing to note is that the improvement plan, it has to be signed by the district superintendent and also the SST consultant assisting with this plan. So both of those people need to be involved with this plan. All right, next slide, Virginia. So to better understand the expectations of the improvement plan, we're just going to kind of walk through an example, but we do want everyone to remember that all improvement plans for each district are going to be completely unique because they have to address those root causes that are uncovered in that earlier self-review summary. So professional development, it's just one of many, many examples that could address, as it's an activity that could address a root cause. So the first thing to put in the improvement plan is the area of improvement. So there we want to describe the broad focus of the improvement efforts. And in the case of alternate assessment, we want to note indicator 3B. So in the summary section, that includes an overview of the data analyzed and the root cause identified. So we want to summarize that baseline data for the area of improvement and the potential root causes and influences. So this is a good time. You might want to reference any of those sections from the self-review summary, such as the policies, practices, procedures, staff training, equity data, etc. So that would be a good time to tie that in the summary and baseline data section. So this district has found a lack of teacher training is likely a root cause of their high participation rate. So the next thing to look at is the goal in the improvement plan. So for the goal, we want to include a specific measurable goal that can be achieved within the time frame of the improvement plan. So as an example, this district wants to reduce their participation rates by improving teacher professional development, and they set a timeline for that. All right, so then with that goal in mind, we want to build on that and create an activity that will describe how the district will reach its goal. So this district, for their activity, is focusing on professional development, and they include a summary of some of the content that they want in that presentation. But remember, all of these are very specific to those root causes. So, and even if you have the same goal, many different activities could, work towards that goal. So we encourage everybody to be creative and think of, other things as well as PD. So, and then the next box, we want to look at the resources needed and list those resources needed to accomplish the goal. So we want to consider, people who need to be there, the tools they need, time required, data to be collected. So this district includes some of the different things that they're going to need, such as the assistance of the SST, guidance provided by the department, assistive skills checklist, some student data. So all of these things are, very good to have at the table, and they're good to list here to make sure that they're utilized. All right, and then we also need to identify the people who will be responsible for ensuring implementation of the plan and who supervises implementation. So we really want to think about the importance of this step. We have to get the right leaders, in these boxes so that we can get the right people on board and that we can have the right people accountable to keep these things moving forward. All right, next slide. So back to thinking about that goal and activity, a few last things we want to look at is the evidence of the activity completed. So how do we know that the goal has been reached? So for example, this district will keep records of participation in PD and the content of the professional development. So they'll collect tools to use to determine participation for each student and kind of review that. So, and then they have for their evidence of improvement / impact this is where districts, they can, they talk about how they're going to evaluate the impact of their work. In this example, we are looking, the district is working to reduce their participation by 0.5 percentage point by the next school year. Okay, next one. All right, and then once you filled all of that stuff in, this is the final page with all that contact info, and just another reminder that the district, the superintendent signature and the SST signature are required here. So those people do need to be involved and at the table for these improvement plans. So then once this is all completed, the district should submit their self-review summary report, this improvement plan, and the verification of the training activities to OEC within the required timeline, which will be in the profile. All right, next slide, please. So we know this is definitely a lot of information. So in addition to this PowerPoint, which was sent as an attachment to the meeting, we also wanted to put a couple other things on your radar as far as resources go. So one thing to note is the indicator manual is a resource for anybody who's completing the profile and has a required action. So that's hot linked in there. It's a great resource. It walks through step by step everything that you need to do and the timelines that are required. So we've included the AASCD section with this presentation as an additional attachment. So if you would like to reference anything that we talked about today, that would be a great place to look. And one other resource that we wanted to make everybody aware of is that within the profile at the bottom, an OEC program specialist is listed, and every single district has a program specialist assigned to assist with their district. So if you want a particular contact within OEC to help, with any profile questions or understanding things, then that person is listed right on the bottom of the profile along with their contact info. And one last thing we wanted to put as far as resources is we wanted to give you this alternate assessment participation mailbox at the department. So if you have any questions that are specific to the alternate assessment or anything that Virginia spoke of today, that would be a great place to start. All right, Virginia, do you have anything to add?
I don't think so.
I don't see any questions. Does anybody have any last minute questions?
So did that help you understand the process of how the profiles work? This is the first time we've done this presentation, so any feedback you have would be great, because um, we just have kind of put this together and wanted to use an example in order to give you some context. So
All
Missy
right. Yeah,
says
looks like we
very
got some
helpful.
chats. Looks like, yeah, we got a couple comments in the chat that it was helpful. So that's great.
All right. And so that, and then just a reminder, since we've got that alternate assessment email address up there, that's for questions about alternate assessment, questions about profiles and the self-review summary report. Those need to go to the program specialists on the supports and monitoring team. So you don't want to send those questions to the alternate assessment email. You're not going to get, they're not going to be able to respond. The question is, how will districts learn this information? Matt, do you want to talk about the process of how districts kind of, the profile walks the districts through these steps?
So if you're just talking about how do districts, find out about the profiles in general when they're released, we have, we send emails out to the district superintendent, special ed contacts. They're contacted through email to let them know that the special ed profile for the year has been released. And as far as, anybody in the district at any time, they can click through, anybody who has access, they can click through the profile that will have all of this information, that we had in here that walks them through those required actions if they do have any required actions. So everything here is, a subset of what's in the profile except for the, additional alternate assessment stuff that Virginia gave us for consideration. All right, well, I think we're about at time, so.
Okay, and we can hang around for a couple of minutes if folks have questions. And yep, the last session starts in 10 minutes.
So yeah, thank you everybody.
Thanks,
We appreciate
everybody.
you attending, and we hope it was helpful and it gave you a good overview and some things to think about when you're helping those districts. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt and Virginia.
Thank you,
You're
Wendy.
welcome.
That's a lot of information to cover.
Talking 100 miles an hour to try to fit it in, and I still went past my goal.
That's okay. Yeah, no, we did a good job. I think I was keeping an eye on time. I was wondering if I should say anything like, okay, if I should say anything, but I figured we could squeeze it in, and we did. We made it.
Yeah, and there's lots of resources to help. We can go slower as things actually get posted.
Right.
Back through again. So no, that was good.
So you guys have these slides, and they have speaker notes on most of the slides for your future use.
Sorry, I'm going to go talk to.
Was she going?